If you're waking up at 3 a.m. night after night, it's not random, and it's not harmless. For many seniors I've worked with, that hour becomes a turning point, the moment they realize something deeper is off. Not just poor sleep, but emotional weight, hidden stress, even early signs of health decline. I've spent over 15 years walking beside older adults, and I've seen firsthand the 7 sleep mistakes that quietly steal rest and peace after 60. If you're over 60 and wide awake while the world is asleep, this video is for you. The room is still, the world is dark, but the mind, the body, fully awake. I feel like I'm the only one in the world awake. One woman, Jeanette, told me during a home visit in Tennessee. She was 68, newly widowed, and had been waking up at 3:11 every morning for the last 3 months. And the worst part, she whispered, is that nothing's wrong exactly, but something also doesn't feel right. That sentence stayed with me, because sleep loss in later life isn't just about restless legs or a creaky mattress. It's emotional, it's spiritual. It's the body whispering something the mind hasn't caught up with yet. And in my time working with both hospice and home care, I've come to see a few patterns that many people unintentionally fall into after 60. Not out of neglect, often out of habit, or loneliness, or simply never being told how sleep changes with age. I remember sitting with Arthur, a retired accountant in Ohio. He was 72, a kind, meticulous man who once kept spreadsheets of his grandchildren's birthdays. But he came to me, deeply frustrated, because he hadn't slept a full night in over a year. "I do everything right," he insisted. "I take my pills, eat dinner early, no coffee afternoon. But I'm still up every night at 3. So we sat, we talked, we reviewed what his evenings actually looked like. Turns out Arthur had developed a habit, almost unknowingly, of watching the nightly news at 10 p.m. every single night. Not just the weather or sports, but the full hour of political commentary, crime reports, economic stress. "It's the only thing that makes me feel connected to the world," he said quietly. But connection, as we both realized, isn't the same thing as peace. What Arthur didn't realize was that his pre-sleep environment was flooded with cortisol triggers. The content he consumed just before bed was priming his body for alertness, not rest. And in older adults, that shift is more potent. The nervous system doesn't bounce back like it used to. What helped wasn't cutting out the news altogether. That would have felt punishing. Instead, we found a compromise, moving his news watching to 6 p.m. and replacing his final hour of the night with a different ritual: soft classical music, a warm compress on his shoulders, a handwritten note to one of his grandchildren. After a few weeks, he didn't stop waking at 3 a.m. altogether. But something shifted. When he did wake, he felt less agitated, more anchored. He'd sometimes fall back asleep. Other times, he'd simply rest without resentment. Sometimes that's the win. What I've learned is that many of these mistakes aren't really mistakes. They're misunderstandings. They're habits that once worked in our 30s or 40s but quietly betray us after 60. Another moment I remember vividly came from Irene, 76, a former teacher who had lived alone since her husband passed. Her sleep, she told me, was light as a feather. She was often wide awake by 2:45 a.m. and unable to return to bed unless she took over-the-counter sleep aids, something she was beginning to rely on more often than not. We took a slow look at her environment. Her room was beautiful. Plants by the window, books stacked neatly on her nightstand. But one detail stood out: a small digital clock, facing her directly, glowing in bright red numbers. "It helps me know what time it is," she said. But what it also did, especially in the silence of 3 a.m., was act as a beacon, a reminder, a countdown. That glowing red became a signal to her body. "You're failing at sleep," I gently suggested, covering the clock. Not removing it, just softening its presence. She did, and within days, she told me something curious. "I still wake up, but it doesn't feel like punishment anymore. It just feels like part of the night." This is something I often see, how subtle environmental triggers can worsen the emotional weight of early waking. The kind of mistake that doesn't seem dangerous, until you realize how many seniors silently spiral into frustration, medication dependency, or anxiety because of something as small as a light source. And there's another pattern, one I've seen across multiple families I've worked with. It's what I call the early shutdown. Around age 60 or 65, many older adults begin shifting their routines earlier. Dinner at 5, television by 6, in bed by 8:30. There's nothing wrong with this. In fact, circadian rhythms do shift with age. But when bedtime creeps earlier and earlier, it can unintentionally move the entire sleep cycle forward. Meaning that 3 a.m. wake-up isn't insomnia. It's simply the body saying, "You've already rested." Understanding this helped one man I worked with, Harold, who had been falling asleep by 7:45 p.m. every night out of habit. He wasn't tired, just bored. After retirement, he told me, "I didn't know what to do with the evenings anymore." So we reframed that time as sacred, not something to rush through. He took up sketching, joined an online chess group. Sometimes he just sat outside and listened to crickets. He still went to bed earlier than most, around 9:30, but that extra hour and a half changed everything. So much of this work isn't about fixing sleep, but honoring it. Understanding how it changes with the seasons of life. When people ask me what the biggest change is in sleep after 60, I often say this: it's not about how long you sleep, it's about how safe you feel when you wake. That usually surprises them. But I've seen it over and over, in assisted living, in private homes, in hospital rooms at 3 in the morning when no one else is around. The real suffering often isn't the waking itself. It's what your mind does with the silence. And one of the most underestimated mistakes I've seen in this stage of life is ignoring emotional restlessness. Not the kind of anxiety that requires a diagnosis, but the kind that whispers, the kind that shows up quietly at 3:12 a.m., with a sigh, a restless turn, a vague sense that something unfinished is knocking at the edge of your memory. I remember Ruth, 71, a retired pastor's wife. She was always composed, thoughtful, gentle in the way she moved and spoke. But for years, she told me she had trouble sleeping. Not falling asleep, staying asleep. She'd wake up between 3 and 4 every single morning. And even though she never felt panicked, she would lie awake for hours, eyes open, body still, mind active. "It's when the thoughts come," she said. "I remember things I thought I forgot, conversations I didn't finish, apologies I never made, places I never visited." She smiled softly when she said it, but I saw the weariness in her eyes. This kind of wakefulness isn't a failure of the body. It's a sign of a soul that still wants to be heard. I asked her what she usually did when she woke up. She paused, then said, "Mostly, I pretend I'm not awake." That answer broke something open in me. So many older adults I've met try to force sleep, lie still, tighten their eyes, beg their minds to shut down. But what if we approached those moments differently? Ruth and I explored a simple new habit. Instead of fighting the wakefulness, she would light a small battery candle beside her bed. Not a harsh light, just a soft, warm glow, and write 3 sentences. Not a journal, not an assignment, just 3 honest thoughts. She called it her night letters. Sometimes she wrote about her late husband, sometimes about God, sometimes just a description of the moonlight on the wall. And you know what happened? She still woke at 3 a.m., but it stopped feeling like a punishment. It became a conversation, a ritual, and over time, those minutes turned from restlessness into rest. Another quiet mistake I've seen often, especially among men, is pushing through physical discomfort without naming it. Ronald was 69 when I met him, a proud, soft-spoken Army veteran. He didn't like complaining, as he put it. He'd been waking up almost nightly with a dull ache in his hips, but brushed it off as just old bones. What he didn't realize was that his mattress, firm and supportive in his 40s, had become a source of constant pressure on his joints. At his age, the body needs something different. With the help of his daughter, we replaced it with a medium-firm mattress with memory foam layers. Nothing fancy. We also added a leg wedge and a heating pad. The results weren't immediate, but within weeks, his sleep extended longer into the morning. More importantly, he told me, "I stopped feeling like sleep was a battle I had to win. There's a lesson in that. So many older adults see sleep struggles as a sign of weakness, something to push through, endure, tough it out. But your body, even in its aches, is asking for kindness. I tell people often, don't shame your body for waking. Listen to it instead. Sometimes it's something physical like Ronald's hips. Sometimes emotional like Ruth's memories. Sometimes just a quiet, sacred shift in your own rhythm. That's what happened with Leonard, age 66, who spent most of his adult life working the night shift at a manufacturing plant. After retiring, he tried to adopt a normal sleep routine like everyone else. But his body didn't cooperate. He kept waking at 2:45 a.m., wide-eyed and alert. I thought I was broken, he said, like I'd missed the memo on how to be a proper retired person. We had a long talk, and what we uncovered was something beautiful. Leonard's body wasn't malfunctioning. It was remembering. After 30 years of waking in the dark to go to work, his nervous system had been wired to associate early hours with alertness, movement, readiness. He didn't need to fight it. He needed to honor it. So he started using that time not to scroll his phone, not to toss and turn, but to write letters to his grandchildren. He called them dawn letters. Sometimes he'd write poetry, sometimes just questions he hoped they'd answer one day. Sleep, for Leonard, didn't return in the way he expected. But peace did, and that's worth more. If you're still here, feel free to leave your thoughts below. I read each one with care. One thing I've learned after sitting beside so many elders is this: we underestimate the power of quiet loneliness, especially at night, especially after 60. It doesn't always announce itself with tears or declarations. Often, it just slips in during the pause between brushing your teeth and turning out the light. You turn off the lamp, the room goes dark, and the silence grows loud. I met Margaret in a small retirement community in Oregon. She was 74 at the time, warm, curious, fiercely independent. But she'd recently lost her closest friend, not to death, but to memory loss. She doesn't remember me anymore, Margaret said with a half smile. But I remember her, especially at night. Margaret had been waking up every night between 3 o'clock and 3:30. No pain, no particular worry, just awake, and always with a hollow feeling in her chest. She tried everything: teas, warm milk, deep breathing. Nothing seemed to touch that ache. So we tried something different. I asked her to name someone, not something she missed deeply. Louise, she said instantly. I suggested that at 3 a.m., instead of trying to suppress the thoughts, she write a letter. Not to send, not even to finish, just write. She did. The next time I visited, Margaret had an entire stack of folded pages on her bedside table. They're mostly just stories, she told me. Moments we lived. Things I hope she felt. Her sleep still wasn't perfect. But something changed. Her nights no longer felt hollow. This kind of emotional weight is often mislabeled as insomnia. But sometimes, what keeps us awake isn't the absence of sleep. It's the absence of connection. And when you fill that space, even quietly, even just with your own words, rest finds its way back. Another pattern I've seen, especially in men who live alone, is misjudging how subtle dehydration becomes with age. Tom was 70, a former physical education teacher with a booming voice and a kind heart. When I met him, he complained of waking up every single night around 2:30 a.m. with leg cramps or a dry mouth. I figured it was just age, he shrugged. The price of getting older. But what we discovered together was simple. Tom had drastically reduced his fluid intake after dinner, afraid of nighttime bathroom trips. What he didn't realize is that even mild dehydration can cause light sleep, muscle tension, and frequent waking, especially in seniors. With his doctor's guidance, Tom started adding a small glass of coconut water or lightly salted broth 1 hour before bed. Nothing excessive, just enough to stabilize hydration and electrolyte balance. And over time, the cramps eased. The dryness faded. And Tom said something I still remember. I forgot how good it feels to wake up without pain. These changes don't require a prescription, just presence, curiosity, a willingness to listen to what the body is asking, even when it whispers. Sometimes the issue is not what you're doing. but what you're no longer doing. Eleanor, age 69, shared something that struck me deeply. She had always been an avid walker, every evening, for over 40 years. But after moving in with her daughter's family, that ritual faded. Life got busy. Dinner came earlier. The neighborhood didn't feel familiar. And gradually, her sleep deteriorated. Restless nights, shortened cycles, 3 a.m. wide awake, again and again. I didn't realize how much my evening walk mattered, she said, until I stopped. We found a solution that worked. Not a long walk, not a big effort, just 15 minutes around the block after dinner, before she got ready for bed. Sometimes her grandson joined her. Sometimes she walked alone with a scarf and her thoughts. The result wasn't dramatic at first, but within a few weeks, she was sleeping deeper, longer. Sometimes the body simply needs to move to know that the day is complete. In so many cases, I've found that what keeps people awake isn't one giant problem. It's a series of quiet abandonments, little things they used to do, small rituals that marked the rhythm of life. Evening walks, writing in a journal, calling a friend, saying a prayer out loud, listening to soft music instead of scrolling news. Sleep doesn't happen in a vacuum. It rests inside the space we create for it. And too often, that space shrinks as we age. Not because we don't care, but because we forget how much we used to hold. I once asked a group of seniors during a wellness session, "What did bedtime look like when you were 35? They laughed. But then came answers: warm milk, story time with kids, kiss goodnight, a book by the lamp, partner's breath beside them. And now, I fall asleep to the sound of the refrigerator," one man said. "I watch reruns until I can't keep my eyes open," said another. The rituals have changed, and so has the energy behind them. This isn't about blame. It's about remembering. Remembering that you're allowed to rebuild the space around your sleep, not with perfection but with care. There's a kind of honesty that only shows up when the lights are out. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The kind that lingers between breaths when the house has finally gone still and there's no one to impress. No task left to finish, no noise to hide behind. And in those moments, usually sometime between 2:30 and 3:15 a.m., something unexpected often rises to the surface. A sense that your body is no longer quite your own. It was Helen, a retired nurse in her early 70s, who first described it to me this way. "I know my body is trying to help me, but sometimes I feel like it's speaking a language I don't understand anymore." She'd been waking up every night like clockwork at 3:08 a.m., sweating lightly, heart pounding just enough to keep her awake. No nightmares, no caffeine, nothing obvious. First, she thought it was emotional. "Maybe it's just unresolved stress," she said. But after tracking her nights with care, we noticed a pattern. Every evening, about 2 hours after taking her blood pressure medication, her body temperature would begin to rise slightly, and by 3 a.m. it would peak, causing her to stir. We spoke with her doctor. Adjustments were made, not to eliminate the medication, but to shift the timing of it. Within days, the intensity of the wake-ups softened. And within weeks, Helen was sleeping until nearly 5, a number she hadn't seen on her clock in over a year. This isn't an uncommon story. Many older adults take medications that are necessary, life-supporting, essential, but whose side effects only reveal themselves in the stillness of night. Not dramatic reactions, but subtle ones. Light sensitivity, body temperature fluctuations, increased need to urinate, vivid dreams, muscle tension. But here's the problem. Many seniors are conditioned not to bother the doctor with minor things, so they carry this discomfort alone. And that's what makes it dangerous. Not the medication itself, but the silence that surrounds it. I always encourage those I work with, if something feels off, speak. Not urgently, not fearfully, just honestly. Your body, even in its quiet complaints, is telling the truth. Then there's the matter of hormones, a topic many assume only affects women during menopause. But after 60, hormonal shifts impact everyone. And what they most often impact: the brain's ability to regulate sleep and mood. Estrogen, testosterone, melatonin, all of these begin to decline. And when melatonin decreases, the natural signal that tells your body it's time to rest becomes weaker, especially in the early morning hours. That's why many seniors fall asleep fine, but wake up around 3 or 4 a.m. and can't return to sleep. James, 68, told me this during one of our early sessions. I feel like I hit a wall at 3:30, like sleep just drops me off and drives away. He said it with a half laugh, but it was clear the experience had worn him down. James wasn't interested in pills. He wanted something gentler, as he put it. So we focused on helping his body recognize night more clearly. Low lighting after 8 p.m. and no screens within an hour of bed. A warm foot soak before sleep. A soft music time to shut off after 30 minutes. A small dose of tart cherry juice, a natural source of melatonin. It wasn't magic, but it was enough. I don't sleep like a teenager, he said after a few weeks, but I don't dread the night anymore. And sometimes that's all someone over 60 really needs. Not perfect sleep, but peace around sleep. But there's something else too. Something even deeper. And it's the most delicate of all. A lack of felt safety. This doesn't always come from trauma or fear in the traditional sense. Sometimes it's more subtle, like sleeping in a bed that feels too big after a spouse is gone. Or the sound of a home that no longer echoes with familiar footsteps. One man I worked with, Roger, 75, had been waking up at 3 a.m. every night since his wife passed. His sleep had always been steady before, solid, predictable, but in her absence, something in his body seemed to stand guard every night, as if still listening for her breathing. I know she's not here, he said, but I wake up like I'm waiting for her. We tried everything, white noise, guided meditations, extra pillows. But what finally made a difference? A voice recording. Roger found an old voicemail his wife had left. Something ordinary. A grocery reminder, her voice light and laughing. He asked his granddaughter to help him loop it quietly into a sound machine. Every night, it played softly in the background. Within days, he started sleeping through the night again. Not because he believed she was there, but because some part of him, the part that loved her, the part that remembered her rhythm, felt safe enough to rest. That's what many forget. Sleep isn't just physical. It's relational. We don't fall asleep into nothingness. We fall asleep into trust. And after 60, when so many relationships change, fade, or disappear, the nervous system needs reassurance. A new kind of comfort. A voice, a rhythm, a ritual. You can't force sleep, but you can make the space around it feel like home again. We spend the first half of life thinking sleep is just something our body does. A switch that flips when the day is over. A simple rhythm. A background function we hardly notice. But after 60, sleep becomes something else entirely. It becomes a teacher. It shows us softly but insistently where we're holding tension, where we're carrying grief, what we've been avoiding in the noise of the day. It shines a quiet light on the things we've tucked away. And in that sense, waking up at 3 a.m. is not always a problem to solve. Sometimes, it's a message. I've seen it too many times to dismiss it. The widow who wakes at the same time her husband used to get up for work. The grandfather who stirs when the house falls too silent, missing the chaos of years gone by. The former nurse who wakes not in panic, but in stillness, her body long trained to rise in the night and check on others. There are reasons for it, medical, emotional, spiritual. But more than anything, there are stories behind it. And what helps most isn't always a pill or a new pillow. It's remembering that sleep, like everything else in aging, asks us to listen differently, to respond with gentleness, not judgment, to see the wakefulness not as failure, but as invitation. So if you find yourself awake in the dark hours, here's what I'd say. From all those I've sat with, all the voices I've heard, don't fight it. Don't rush to fix it. Just notice. What is your body asking for? What does your spirit still need to process? Sometimes it's something small. A hand on your heart. A breath that says, I'm still here. Sometimes it's an old memory. A familiar sound. A single word whispered in prayer. And sometimes, it's simply a reminder that even now, you are not alone. If there's one thread that's connected all the people I've worked with, All the Margarets and Arthurs and Ruths and Jameses. It's this, they weren't broken. They were adjusting. They were learning how to rest in a different season of life. And so are you. It's okay if your nights don't look the way they used to. It's okay if your rest comes in pieces. It's okay to reshape your routines, your rituals, your rhythms. That's not failure. That's wisdom in motion. You're allowed to change. You're allowed to rest differently than before. And more than anything, you're allowed to ask for comfort. Even if it comes in the form of a quiet voice, a soft light, or a new bedtime story you write just for yourself. Thank you for being here, for listening this far. These stories, these insights, they're not just advice. They're pieces of real lives. And I hope, in some way, they help you feel seen. If this kind of quiet reflection feels helpful to you, you're welcome to come back anytime. I'll be here,